I told you I wanted to talk. I wanted to share with you a revelation that I got when I lived in Germany, many years ago, back in the 80s. And I got to know a lot of Germans, and including, and in fact, the guy who was the founder of the organization that I was volunteering with, the Salem International. Their website is saleminternational.org if you want to learn more about them. Gottfried Müller, the founder, had been a soldier in Hitler's army. In fact, he'd been a spy for Hitler. He was sent to the Middle East to help the Kurds capture the oil fields, and the Iranians at that time controlled that part of Kurdistan, and he was parachuted into the middle of a British camp fairly early in the war and was immediately captured and put in prison. So he spent the whole war in a prison cell, condemned to death. The Iranians were going to hang him. The British were going to shoot him. They owned the camp. They ran the camp together, and he basically stayed there until the end of the war. And it was really interesting talking with him about how Germans viewed Hitler early on, in the early 30s, and how they came to view Hitler later on. And I have several friends who are Japanese. One particularly close friend I've discussed this with, and I've spent some time in Japan, and I've done a lot of business in Japan, and I can read history. And here's my theory. The reason why the suicide fighters, the suicide bombers, the Japanese the kamikaze pilots, were willing to fly a plane into the deck of a U.S. aircraft carrier. In fact, they competed for the privilege of doing so, was because they believed that their emperor was the direct descendant of the first human on Earth who was the child of the sun. In other words, was divine. Germans, Herr Mueller told me about when he was at the, I think it was in 1937, at the giant Nuremberg rally, and he carried a banner up to Hitler, and Hitler touched it with a banner that had blood on it from something. And he said there was just this feeling, and I'm paraphrasing probably terribly from memory, but just this feeling of you're part of something that is so much bigger than you, and that is essentially spiritual. Hitler talked about blood and earth, how, German blood and German soil, how we are part of this earth, this particular earth called Germany. It was the homeland, the Heimat. You've heard that quote from Hess many times. I won't play it again. And the people of Germany, and this is backed up by Milton Mayer's book, They Thought They Were Free, which is a brilliant, right after World War II, this a Jewish reporter for the Chicago Tribune, I believe it was, went over to Germany and spent a year with 10 families, 10 average Germans, college professor, a lab guy, just a baker, and average Germans who did not speak out, and pretty much by the end of the war knew everything that was going on, because everybody did. And, he said, why'd you go along with this? And they said the same thing. So here's where I'm going with this. The reason why Germany and Japan had to be absolutely militarily defeated was because the people of both these countries were in a trance. It was the Patty Hearst syndrome, right? Patty Hearst was kidnapped by the Symbionese Liberation Army, and then she went and did a bank robbery with them and started talking about how her father and the oppressor class and all this kind of stuff. They were hypnotized essentially by a death cult in both cases, Germany and Japan. And it took destroying the leadership of the cult to cause people to go, blah, 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 blah. Oh, wait a minute. These guys aren't divine. They don't rule everything. Apparently the death by influenza of most of the royal family of the Mayans and the Aztecs, the Mayans and the Incas in the 1600s, late 1600s, did the same thing. The societies these warlike society or these city-states that crumbled. So you've got a charismatic leadership and an ideology that is basically religiously based. And people will give their lives for that. So here's the question that I don't know the answer to. Assuming that I'm correct about Germany and Japan, that we had to break the spell. And by the way, with one single exception, there was one guy that I knew who actually was a Nazi to his dying day, thought Hitler's biggest mistake was he invaded Russia a year too early. He was a much older guy than me, and he died a few years back. But outside of that guy, that one guy, every other German I ever talked to was like, who was alive back during World War II, was like, we were entranced. And after the war, we woke up and we said, how could we have done this? Because Hitler got taken down and the death cult was no longer in charge. And it was like, oh, we can be humans again. So with this death cult that comes out of Saudi Arabia and Qatar, this Salafi Islam, and I say death cult, I mean, quite literally meaning it. Look at the Vice News reporting on ISIS. How do you stop it? How do you, yeah, we want to encourage the moderate Muslims. It's 97% in the region even. We want to encourage ISIS is only 20, 30,000 people at its core. And probably much less than that at the hardcore core. It's probably just a few thousand, maybe even a few hundred. Much like the leadership of the Nazi movement was, and Tojo's Japan. So how do you do it? I don't know the answer to this question. But I think that this is the existential question that our military and our diplomats should be asking. Not, do we fight this war here with these guys? Do we support this guy or that guy? How do you break the hold of a death cult on the minds of people? And it seems to me that you do it by, one, taking away their power, and two, exposing the fact that they were a death cult. How toxic they are, and letting people wake up to that, letting people go, oh my God, we did that? To our women? To our neighbors? To the Shia next door? To the Jew next door? To the Christians next door? To the Yazidi next door? We did that? Now, the history of the region sort of suggests that because you've got these death cults who are being fueled and funded by Saudi Arabia and Qatar and a few others in the region who have a dog in the fight, that the most effective way to do this would be to stop Saudi Arabia and Qatar. And to do that, you've got to wake up the American people to the fact that we're doing the equivalent of funding Hitler in 1933 or 35 or 37. I think it was 39 he invaded Poland, wasn't it? That was really the 37 was when he took Austria. I don't remember my World War II history that well, but I think it was in that neighborhood. But how do we ourselves come to see this clearly and see the role that our oil companies and our oil policies that Jimmy Carter took us on the path away from, right? Jimmy Carter said in 1978, we will never again consume more oil than we did in 1977. And he put policies in place that would have guaranteed that. Ronald Reagan took them all apart. First thing he did when he came into office, I'm here because the oil guys put a lot of money into my campaign. We are going to end all of Carter's policies for energy independence for the United States. No more solar bank that'll provide 20% of America's electricity by the year 2000. No more, so we paid for Saudi Arabia and Qatar. And Saudi Arabia and Qatar paid for ISIS and Hamas and Boko Haram and on and on. I mean, we have to acknowledge our role in this. We have to wake up from our trance, and then we have to figure out how to help the people of the Middle East wake up from their trance. And does that take military intervention like it did in the 1940s? Or are there other ways to do it?
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
And if I was sitting in the White House, I would have my best diplomats and my best military people sitting down and discussing this issue. Because this seems to be the core of it.